Imagine a fighter aircraft so powerful, so agile, and so ahead of its time that it could outperform almost everything in the skies. Yet, it arrived too late to rule the future. This is the story of the Grumman F8F Bearcat, a piston-engine legend that was built to dominate, but ironically marked the closing chapter of prop-driven dogfights. While the world was rushing toward jets, the Bearcat stood as the last roaring lion of an era that would never return. But why did this beast of a machine, capable of astonishing speeds and unmatched maneuverability, end up symbolizing the end of the jet era instead of the beginning of a new dawn for piston-engine fighters? Today, we're diving into history to uncover why the F8F Bearcat's rise also meant the end of something far greater. The Bearcat was born out of desperation during World War II. The U.S. Navy needed a carrier-based fighter that was smaller, lighter, and faster than the F6F Hellcat and F4U Corsair. Grumman's engineers responded with a revolutionary design, a stripped-down, high-powered aircraft wrapped around the monstrous Pratt and Whitney R2800 double wasp engine. This combination created a fighter that could climb like a rocket, turn tighter than almost anything else in the sky, and still carry enough firepower to tear enemy planes apart. Pilots called it a hot rod with wings. It was everything a fighter should be: fast, deadly, and responsive. But there was a twist. By the time the Bearcat was ready for war, the war itself was ending, and the age of jets was just beginning. By mid-1945, the Bearcat was finally ready to enter combat, but fate had other plans. Japan surrendered before the FAF ever saw battle. The Navy had poured its resources into creating of the best piston fighters ever built, only to discover that it had arrived too late. Worse yet, jet aircraft like the Messerschmitt Me-262 in Germany and the Gloucester Meteor in Britain had already shown the world that propellers were on their way out. The Bearcat was designed to rule dogfights that never happened, against enemies that were no longer in the sky. Instead, it became a fighter without a war, an apex predator born into a new ecosystem it could not dominate. Even though it missed WWI, the Bearcat quickly gained a reputation among pilots. Its climb rate was so extraordinary that it could reach 10,000 feet in just over 90 seconds. It was faster than most Allied fighters and could out-turn and out-climb almost any piston-engine aircraft. Pilots described flying the Bearcat as exhilarating, like handling a sports car compared to the heavy sedans of the day. Its roll rate was lightning fast, and its ability to recover from spins made it a favorite among test pilots. Yet, for all its brilliance, its timing was unforgiving. The Bearcat represented the absolute peak of piston-engine technology, yet the future of aerial combat no longer belonged to pistons. As the Bearcat was taking to the skies, something bigger was happening. Jet propulsion was rewriting the laws of speed and combat. The U.S. Navy and Air Force were already testing jet fighters like the P-80 Shooting Star and F-9F Panther. Jets could fly faster, higher, and eventually farther than any piston engine could dream of. The Bearcat may have been the king of propeller-driven fighters, but jets were a new species entirely. The military knew the truth. No matter how perfect the Bearcat was, the future was jet-powered. In this sense, the Bearcat wasn't the start of something. It was the magnificent, bittersweet end of an era. The U.S. Navy had initially envisioned the Bearcat as its ultimate dogfighter, light enough to launch from small escort carriers, but powerful enough to dominate enemy skies. Yet after World War II, the Navy's needs changed. The massive fleets of carriers that had once filled the Pacific were no longer central to strategy. Instead, America was looking ahead to Cold War rivalries, nuclear deterrence, and faster interceptors. The Bearcat, despite being nearly flawless at what it was designed to do, suddenly felt like a relic before it even had a chance to prove itself. It was like building the best sword in the world at the exact moment when everyone else had switched to guns. This was the cruel irony of the Bearcat. It was a masterpiece created for a world that had already moved on. One thing every pilot agreed on was that the Bearcat was pure joy to fly. Unlike heavier fighters that demanded muscle and constant attention, the Bearcat responded instantly to control inputs. It was smooth, precise, and forgiving in ways other high-performance aircraft simply weren't. Many pilots considered it the finest piston-engine fighter ever made, and those lucky enough to test it would never forget the experience. Even when compared with early jets, the Bearcat's agility made it feel alive. But while pilots loved it, commanders cared about numbers, range, speed, and future adaptability. And in those categories, jets were already starting to outshine props. The Bearcat was a dream for pilots, but it couldn't compete with the cold realities of technology. Even though it never fought in a major war, the Bearcat left its mark in other ways. In 1946, Lieutenant Commander Robert A. Hoover set a time to climb record in the Bearcat, reaching 10,000 feet faster than any fighter before it. Air racing also became the Bearcat's playground. Civilian pilots snapped them up after their military careers ended, and in the Reno air races, modified Bearcats dominated the skies for decades. Their speed, reliability, and sheer power made them legends in the racing world, with some clocking speeds over 500 mph at low altitude. The Bearcat proved again and again that it was more than just a war machine. It was an engineering marvel. Yet, no matter how many records it set, its role in combat history remained painfully small. The Bearcat became more than just an airplane. It became a symbol. To many aviation historians, it represents the pinnacle of piston-engine design and the final chapter of an era dominated by propellers. At the same time, it also stands as a reminder that technology waits for no one. The transition from props to jets was swift and merciless, and even a near-perfect machine like the Bearcat couldn't slow it down. If anything, the Bearcat highlights how quickly aviation evolved. In less than a decade, the world went from fabric-covered biplanes to screaming jets that broke the sound barrier. The Bearcat's brilliance was undeniable, but history had already turned the page. The sad truth is that the Bearcat never got the fame it deserved. It entered service quietly, overshadowed by the growing fascination with jets. While aircraft like the F-86 Sabre and MiG-15 were grabbing headlines in Korea, the Bearcat was already being phased out. In just a few short years, it went from being the Navy's pride to an obsolete relic. Yet, for those who knew what it could do, the Bearcat remained unforgettable. It wasn't just a fighter. It was a statement, a final, roaring masterpiece that declared, "This is everything piston technology can achieve." And perhaps that's why it still holds such a legendary place in aviation history today. The Bearcat's story offers a powerful lesson. Even the greatest engineering achievements can be overtaken by time. Military history is filled with weapons and machines that were designed for one war but arrived too late to fight it. The Bearcat was one of the clearest examples. It was not that the Bearcat wasn't good enough. On the contrary, it was almost too good. It pushed piston technology to its absolute limits, creating a machine that pilots adored. But technology does not evolve in a straight line. It leaps. The jet engine was a leap, and the Bearcat was left stranded on the wrong side of history. In a way, it became a tragic masterpiece, a symbol of how progress can erase brilliance in an instant. When compared side by side with early jets like the Lockheed P-80 or the British Gloster Meteor, the Bearcat still held its own in certain respects. At low altitudes, it could sometimes even outperform them in maneuverability and acceleration, but jets had one undeniable advantage: speed at high altitude. They were built for a future where dogfights would be rare, and interception would be about climbing fast, striking hard, and flying away. The Bearcat represented the last warrior of the old school, where turning battles, tight maneuvers, and close-range gunnery still mattered. Early jets weren't perfect. They were unreliable, had short ranges, and often struggled in combat. But they carried the promise of evolution, while the Bearcat was a perfected past. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, it was the first true test of the jet age. The F-86 Sabre faced off against the MiG-15 in legendary battles that defined a new era of aerial combat. The Bearcat, it never made it to the fight. By then, it was already considered outdated, despite being less than 5 years old. Jets dominated the skies, and piston fighters were relegated to ground attack roles at best. The Bearcat had been designed to win dogfights that no longer existed. Instead, its absence in Korea became the clearest proof that the world had moved on. For many, this was the moment the Bearcat's fate was sealed. It would never be remembered as a war hero, only as a forgotten king. Even though it missed out on combat, the Bearcat did find an important role, training the next generation of pilots. Its incredible performance made it a perfect stepping stone for aviators who would soon transition to jets. It taught them how to handle speed, power, and precision in ways that earlier trainers couldn't. Many Navy pilots who later flew the F9F Panther or F-86 Sabre credited the Bearcat with preparing them for the unforgiving world of jet combat. In this sense, the Bearcat quietly shaped the jet age, not by fighting in it, but by training the men who would go on to win it. It became a bridge between two worlds, the piston era and the jet era. Today, the Bearcat is one of the most sought-after warbirds in the world. Restored models are prized at air shows, where their sleek lines and roaring engines still draw gasps from the crowd. Aviation enthusiasts see the Bearcat not just as an airplane, but as a piece of living history, the very last of its kind. Each flight is a reminder of what piston technology could achieve at its peak before jets silenced the roar of propellers. In the world of aviation collectors, owning a Bearcat is like owning the crown jewel of piston fighters. It's not just a machine, it's a legacy frozen in time, representing both triumph and tragedy in the story of human flight. To truly understand the Bearcat's uniqueness, you have to compare it with the fighters it replaced. The F-4U Corsair was rugged, powerful, and a veteran of brutal Pacific battles. The F-6F Hellcat was a workhorse, responsible for more enemy kills than any other Navy fighter. Both were legends, but the Bearcat was something different. It was leaner, faster, and designed with one goal: air superiority. Where the Corsair was tough and the Hellcat dependable, the Bearcat was explosive, a machine stripped of everything unnecessary, built purely for performance. In many ways, it wasn't a successor at all. It was an experimental leap. But while the Corsair and Hellcat earned eternal fame in war, the Bearcat was destined to be remembered as the fighter that came too late. Timing is everything in aviation history, and the Bearcat is perhaps the best example of bad timing. If it had entered service just 1 year earlier, it might have become the deadliest Allied fighter of World War II. It could have shredded Japanese Zeros, dominated the Pacific, and cemented itself as a war hero. Instead, it entered the stage after the final curtain had already fallen. Then, when it might have been useful in Korea, it was already obsolete. It was born in the narrow space between two worlds. Too late for the old one, too early for the new. This cruel twist of timing is why the Bearcat is often called both the greatest piston fighter ever built and one of the most unnecessary. So why does the F8F Bearcat mark the end of the jet era? The answer lies in symbolism. The Bearcat wasn't just another airplane. It was the last perfected piston fighter. It represented everything that prop-driven technology could achieve. But its arrival also highlighted the reality that piston engines, no matter how advanced, could never compete with jets. The Bearcat showed the world the ultimate limit of the old era, and by doing so, it closed the book on it. It wasn't the start of something new, but the glorious ending of something legendary. The jet age didn't just begin with aircraft like the P-80 or MiG-15. It began the moment machines like the Bearcat became obsolete. Looking back, the Bearcat is more than just a machine. It's a reminder of how fast human innovation moves. It teaches us that progress doesn't stop for perfection. Even the greatest designs can be swept aside by revolutions in technology. The Bearcat reminds us that history isn't always about who was the best, but about who was the most relevant at the right moment. It shows us the bittersweet truth of innovation. Greatness can exist without recognition, and brilliance can be overshadowed by timing. Yet, its story also inspires us, because even though the Bearcat missed its war, it still left a legacy that continues to thrill and inspire aviation lovers around the world. Today, when you see a Bearcat at an air show, screaming across the sky with its massive engine growling, you're not just watching an airplane. You're witnessing the last roar of a vanished era. You're seeing the very peak of piston power, a machine that came too late for battle, but never too late to inspire. The Bearcat may not have won wars, but it won hearts, and it forever carved its place in aviation history as the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It reminds us that even in endings, there is glory. The Bearcat marked the end of the prop era and the dawn of jets. And for that reason alone, it remains unforgettable. The F8F Bearcat wasn't just an airplane, it was the final roar of propeller-driven aviation. A machine so perfect, it proved that sometimes the greatest creations don't win wars, they define eras. And while the jet age may have silenced it, the legend of the Bearcat will never fade. If this story moved you, smash that like button, share it with every aviation fan you know, and subscribe. Because history like this deserves to keep flying.